Hello, welcome to this next Substance Designer tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to have a look at making shapes, essentially. More complex shapes than you get by default in Substance. So we'll start out with a Substance graph, and I'm just going to pick metal roughness and we'll leave all of this as default. There we go, and then I'm going to just rearrange my library a bit, or screen rather, so that we can see what's going on. Okay, so there's a few nodes which I've overlooked, which can really be helpful and powerful. One of those is the Splatter Circular. Now, what we're going to do in our first little thing is use the Splatter Circular to make a cog. But before I do that, I'm just going to set up my output end. So I'm going to press space and pop in a blend node. So everything from my graph over this side is going to plug into this blend node, and then this blend node will go into the normal, it will go into the ambient, not quite the ambient, not just yet, the height, and I'm going to put in an ambient node, ambient occlusion node here, plug that into there, or the blend into that, and that into the ambient. There we go. So let's get rid of these superfluous ones. There we go. Now these are all complaining at the moment because this doesn't really know what it is. It doesn't know whether it's colour or whether it's grayscale. It will end up grayscale, and then these errors will fix themselves. Okay, so we can use the shape splatter initially to make a ring, which is very simple. We need a shape, so we'll press space and type shape, and I'm going to turn that shape into a disc so it's got no edges, and then we'll press space and type splatter, and we want splatter circular. So if I plug that into the top node, you'll see that that splatters that round in a circle. But currently it's a paraboloid, and that's because the pattern input is paraboloid. We'll change that to image input. Now we could just use the circle from here, but there are times when I might want to actually change the shape, squeeze it, or alter it, so I like to put a shape in personally. So back on the splatter node, we can increase our pattern amount until it becomes a disc. 64 is a little rough. You see we've got these little kind of scalloped edges on here, but if I pop that up further and further, it should iron those out. So that's a really easy kind of ring. And what else have we got here? We have the pattern amounts random. We have all sorts of options which we'll go through as we go through this, but I'm just starting out with a relatively simple one. Okay, so if I want to turn this into a cog, I'm going to need some tangs coming off of it. So we'll need a shape for that. So I'm going to type in shape, and this time I'll leave it on the square, and then I want another splatter circular. And if I plug that in and switch the pattern over to image input, that's what we get. So again, we can increase our pattern amount. I don't want them to overlap, so not too many. We can change our pattern inputs. We could have more than one square coming into there, one type of square, and we can increase the radius. Now I'm increasing the radius now, but I'm going to adjust that in a moment, because this other input here is a background input, and if I plug our circle into this, you'll see then that it adds them together nicely and we have a cog. So all that's left is to input that into our blend and then set up our material, which I didn't do. Let's do that now. So I want more tessellation and a bit more height, and now we're starting to get what we want, which is a pretty nice cog. Of course, we can come into this node here, this splatter, and increase our pattern amount, and make it however we want to. Now one more thing after this, if I pop in a bevel node on this noodle, So press space and bevel, and then reduce the distance down. Oops, not to negative. Come on, there we go. And I can put a little bit of an angle on that to, you know, start to make it look a bit nice. There we go. So that's our first shape with the splatter node. When we come back, we'll do a more complex one. So I shall talk to you then. Okay, so next then we're going to have a go at a kind of a flower type shape. And for that I'm going to start off with a shape. And we'll set this to a disc. There we go. And then I'm going to use a shape mapper. So the shape mapper works kind of similarly to the shape splatter circular, except it adds an element of deformation, which is, you know, what we're going to need here. And as you can see, we've got all of our kind of circles mapped in here, but they are deformed ever so slightly. So we can change our radius down, and I want to get to somewhere around there. We can change the pattern amount to whatever you want it to be. We can change the width of our entire flower piece, and that's about that really. Radius, width, rotation. You can add an element of rotation to these, so you can rotate the whole thing, you know, as you want. I'm just noticing actually that this isn't going to be entirely suitable as it is. I'm just going to take the scale down a bit to get a border between each of these. Okay, so with that said, what we're going to do is add to this an edge detect. So the edge detect will find the edges in our petals. Each of these is separated by black, so it detects those as shapes, and then we have parameters within the node to tell it what to do. So for example, edge width, I can make the edge really wide. I can update the roundness. As you can see, that's starting to, you know, fill in the edges, which is okay actually. I don't mind that in this particular case, as long as it's not completely nuts and starting to go over the edge as it is at the bottom there. Look, there we go, now it's not. Okay, so now we want something to go in the middle of this, and for that I want another circle. Actually, we'll just use the same one, and we'll bring that out, and this one will go into a splatter circular. Interesting. Is that doing anything? Image input. Well, that didn't do anything very exciting at all. So let's try that again. Whoops, space and splatter circular. Did I pick splatter instead of splatter circular? I suspect I did. There we go. So with this, what we can do actually is increase the amount of rings. So you see that as I'm adding rings, it's adding a level into our piece. And if I add a bit of an amount random in, and a min random, come down here, we could inject different patterns into this. We can update our radius. Basically, I just want a shape that, you know, looks a little bit like the center of a flower, and I'm just after one shape in this case, which we can mold in with this one. So let's take this out to an edge detect. There we go. So I can increase my edge width and my roundness to kind of get a stylized kind of centre flower, and then we can blend these together. So we've got this as copy. I can take the opacity down, but actually I think I just want this to be well, let's try and multiply. There we go. So that's not quite what I'm after. It's a little bit messy, so I'm going to need to do something about this. Let's take this down a little bit. So where are we? Ring amount, ring amount. I want the radius. So if I pull the radius in, there we go, start to get a center to our flower, which we can then, you know, use elsewhere. And let's plug that into our output blend, which is that one there, and that's what we get. I've kind of done this the wrong way around really, so I'll just pop an invert in here. So select that noodle and invert, and now we get a kind of a flowery design that we could use in a, you know, like a wood carving kind of thing. I'm not entirely happy with this. I might increase the edge width. There we go. And of course, if I change the shape, in this particular case it will make nearly no difference at all, because we're using this edge detect, so that's not actually made much difference. But we could ignore the edge step, pop that into an add, and we'll get something completely different again. Let me just turn this invert off, and there we go. We have a slightly more realistic, only slightly more realistic stylized flower, shall we say. Okay, so that's a flower shape, and when we come back we'll have a look at another one. Let me just arrange these for a moment. There we go. Let's pop those into a frame and call this one flower. And this one cog, or gear, or whatever you want to call it. There we go. Okay, so I'll talk to you again in a few moments. Okay, next then we're going to create a spiral. I'm not sure what you call it. It's kind of a curly Q kind of thing, but you'll see when we get there. Okay, so let's start with a shape, and we'll pop that to paraboloid. Whoops. And we'll pump that into a splatter circular. There we go. Now, somewhat weird's happening here. Oh, it's gone into there. Okay, let's take that out. It went into the background, not the foreground. So I'll switch that over to the image input, and then we need to change our types. So what I want to do here is create basically a little spiral. And down in the pattern options we have, not the pattern options, sorry, the position options, we have a spiral factor. If I turn that up to somewhere around max, you'll see what happens. So now if I go up to our pattern amounts, I'm going to increase that till I get a nice spiral. So 1, 2, 8, that's probably nice and smooth. So you can adjust this as you want it, basically. So you know, you can make it tighter or you know, looser depending upon your needs. But that's basically half of it, and we want to transform it and then join it back together again. Transform it so that this goes all the way down and then all the way back round over here. So first of all, I'm going to put this into a transform node, transform 2D, and then I'm going to move it in X off to one side, not too far, just far enough, somewhere where this is somewhere around the middle. And then I want another transform off this one to get the other side, and this time I want to rotate it. So if I rotate it 180, it will go to there, and that should be about right. So now I can blend these two together and adjust them until they fit. So I'll need a better blend than that. Let's go add, and now I just need to change my offset here to get that right. So let's make sure this is double clicked, single click on the transform, and then we can see that it works. Our blend mode looks wrong because we're getting this kind of really stark piece here. So let's go on to the blend and switch that out to perhaps a max lighten. There we go. So now we have a nice little curly Q, if that's what you call them. I've no idea. Let's drag and drop that down there, and you know, we can add that to furniture and all sorts as we want. Of course you can add further shapes into it. I'm just sort of showing you kind of a base. We could change our shape, of course. Let's try a bell and see what we get. We get a much sharper one. We can let's try the gradation and see what that does. Well, it does crazy things. Pyramid. Yeah, so you can try all sorts of things. And if you want to get rid of this, you know, feathering kind of, or you know, shuttering kind of thing, we could put a blur in the middle. Whoops, not a blue. Let's try an HQ blur. Just bring that quality up and bring the intensity down a little. There we go. Oops, no, that was too much. There we go. Somewhere around there. Okay, so let's group those up and pop a frame on them. Where's the frame? There it is, and I'm just going to call this a swirl just for fun. Okay, so when we come back we'll have a look at another shape, see what we can get out of that. Okay, so as well as being quite, you know, precise with these shapes, you can equally go completely random and organic with them. So let's start off with a shape again. Switch the shape to my paraboloid, and then I'll pump that into a shape splatter. Whoops, helps if you press space first. Where are we? Oh no, it's not a shape splatter, it's a splatter shape. Splatter circular rather. There we go. So let me just collapse all these down here so that we can see all of the options we've got. So we've got our instance number where we can increase the number of instances we have, introduce a level of randomness into that amount. We can do a min and max, or no, just a min, and we can increase our ring amount. So that's under instance parameters. Under pattern, we can set the input, of course. We can set more than one input, so let's have 2 inputs. And for our second one, we'll have, say, a thorn or something. Let's pop that in there, and then set this to a thorn. And now we're getting both of our patterns intermingled. So obviously, you know, we can have many more than that. We can set our distribution by random or by pattern number. I'm going to go random. And yeah, that's maps. If you get a border on these things, I'll often put this to nearest. Random symmetry, no, not interested in that. Okay, so let's take that up. So position then, so we can change our position to kind of explode or you know, contract our shape. Going to explode it a bit. Try not to get too near to the edge. We can add a level of randomness to that. We can actually angle random, so that's going to add a level of angle to each of our points. I'm not going to use spiral factor. Spread is interesting. If I take that down, you'll see it kind of fans down or up depending upon which way you go. So if you go 2, it kind of overlaps with itself. If you go down to 0, it's just one spoke, if you like, but 1 will get you sort of dead on the middle. There's an offset along direction, which, as you can see, kind of opens that middle up. Okay, let's go to our size. I think is next. You can hit connect patterns, which makes it behave much more like the node we looked at earlier, the pattern mapper. You'll see that if we turn that on, we start to get deformation. And that gives us much more kind of spiraling inwards kind of look. So we can take these values up and down to get a difference. I'm going to extend that out to get something a little bit more crazy. I'm just going to press space on here to make sure it tiles, which it does. We can add a random value in to each of those, X and Y, and even a scale random. Well, that comes out nicely. We'll scale by pattern number. So, you know, we've got 2 patterns. Could scale them independently or differently, and we can even scale by a ring number. So I've rather forgotten how many rings we had. We had 4. Let's turn that back. Yeah. So the more rings I have and the more scale I put in on there, the more it's going to do the job. Okay, we can invert the ring number, so that will reverse this scale. We have rotation, so we can randomly rotate our patterns. See, that kind of swims around. We can change the pivot for that random rotation from center to min X, max X, min Y, and it will behave differently. I'm going to stick it on the center and take that down a bit. There we go. Right, we also have a ring rotation random, so randomly rotate each ring, and a ring rotation offset. There we go. See, some of those points aren't really moving at all in that, so the closer to the center it's getting, the more it's moving, giving us a kind of a, I don't know, spiral effect, I guess. And last of all, we have color. So we can have a luminance random, so it's going to change the luminance of our each of our pieces random. We can do a luminance by scale, so the bigger the piece, the more bright it will be. And I'm just going to come back up here to my scales and just mess around with these a little bit to get a stronger pattern. There we go. So we've got something that's now vaguely reminiscent of kind of a bullet hole, if you like, or a crack in something or other, or well, all sorts of things really. But let's plug it into our output and see what we get, and that's what we get. Obviously it's a bit exaggerated by our height depth here, and we can of course add in those to this to soften it up. So let's do an HQ blur. I'll pop that up there and take the intensity down and the quality up until I get some that's a bit softer. There we go, it's a bit more organic-y now. That's quite nice, I like that. Yeah, very happy with that. Might adjust my whoops, that's not what I want to adjust. I wasn't on the right one. Let's adjust that height depth to perhaps take the radius down a little, just to exaggerate our shape. I think I managed to undo my intensity here. Let's take that up a bit. There we go. So there we go. So not just for making, you know, perfect, nice, symmetrical, or, you know, geometric-y type shapes, you can do, you know, more organic-y shapes in it as well. So I hope that's given you a bit of a flavour for the whole. So it's the Splatter Circular node that we used there for the majority of it, and we got some quite nice effects out of it. And I encourage you to experiment with it, plug things in, change some values, see what you get out of it. And you know, the more you experiment, the more you'll get used to it, and the more you'll get out of it, essentially. So that's it for today. I hope you found that useful, and you know, write a comment below, give me a like, you know, do whatever you want to do. Okay, thank you very much. Talk soon.